The future of federalism. After the election of 1992, deficit reduction became the primary goal of President Clinton. After his budget proposal was approved by Congress, it became apparent that fiscal federalism and grant programs would be greatly affected by cutbacks in the federal program. Even so, the trend seemed to support grants based on specific federal requirements. The move towards national education standards was supported by a number of federal grants to school districts willing to accept the concept. In addition to budget restraints, the Supreme Court has played a role in defining the extent to which the federal government can dictate the contemporary nature of federalism. In 1976, in National League of Cities versus Usury, in a 5-4 decision, the court ruled that the federal minimum wage and maximum hours of the Fair Labor Standards Act could not be extended to state and local government employees. In 1985, the court reversed itself in Garcia versus San Antonio Metro. Again, in a 5-4 decision, the court ruled that Congress, not the court, had the right to determine which actions of the state could be regulated by the federal government. The 10th Amendment notwithstanding. In 1988, in South Carolina v. Baker, the court again affirmed Garcia versus San Antonio Metro and ruled that federal minimum wage standards could be applied to state employees. Yet in one of the most controversial areas, abortion, the court in Casey versus Planned Parenthood allowed the states to pass laws restricting the unchecked right of women to have abortions. The Rehnquist court has reflected the changing nature of federalism. It has affirmed the ability of the federal government to pass along programs to the state, yet it has also made it clear that in areas such as abortion and carrying out the death penalty, states can and should act on their own. In one of the most interesting decisions the court made, United States v. Lopez in 1995, the court, in a 5-4 decision, ruled that the Federal Gun Control Act prohibiting the possession of guns within 1,000 feet of a school was unconstitutional based on a misuse of federal authority. The court also limited the power of the federal government to enforce provisions of the Americans with Disabilities Act during the last decade. The future of federalism seems unclear. After the election of 1994, the Republican contract with America clearly signaled a return to a more traditional approach. This trend continued as the Republican majority in both houses maintained itself throughout the 1990s. Such measures as welfare reform, a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution, and regulatory reform were introduced with the explicit purpose of downsizing government and returning power to the states. Congress passed an unfunded mandates law that placed major restrictions on Congress and the executive branch regarding passing legislation and regulations that had a price tag for the states. In fact, states challenged the Motor Voter Act of 1993 as an unfunded mandate, placing an unfair fiscal burden on the states. California refused to appropriate the funds necessary to implement it, and the Justice Department brought the state to court. The courts, however, ruled that California must abide by the provisions of the law. Other parts of the contract were passed by one or both of the houses, but not signed into law by the president. But the message of the election was clear. Federalism was again undergoing a major transformation that will last well into the 21st century.